The individual grows as the group gathers, part two. Welcome to our YouTube channel. So, here we discuss tools, tips, and techniques, and we are busy talking more about philosophy and the implication of the Ubuntu in terms of group facilitation. So, if you are passionate about groups, you are at the right place. So this is our second episode where we're unpacking Ubuntu or the OTGrow theme of this year, where we have put a slight emphasis difference and we've spoken about the individual grows as the group gathers. And our expert with us today is Michael Fisher. Hi, Michael.
Hello, good to be back again.
Yeah. All right. So today we spoke last time about Ubuntu and the concept and how what does that mean and why it's such a amazing concept or philosophy, or you spoke about ethical framework in terms of group facilitation or group therapy. But we kind of spoke more philosophical, and today we want to unpack a little bit more about, so what does that mean for me as a group facilitator or a group therapist? What does that imply? And, there's these kind of big, elusive, vague words of holding the tension, but kind of what does that mean? So maybe to just jump in and to say also that apart from doing your master's, you've also been facilitating for more than, I think, 3 years as a co-facilitator for OTGrow, as well as for the More Than Mere Us MPC in communities and things like that. So, yeah, just talking about it from the practical implementation part. So, kind of, yeah, I'd like to hear your take on what does it mean to hold this tension and what does it mean practically between the individual and the group?
So I think when we get into it's very important to underline that Ubuntu works specifically with the interactive group model. When you have something like a DBT group or a arts therapy group, they again gravitate more towards the extremes of either holding the group as a whole or focusing on the individual within the group. So just to put it in the context that it is specifically for the interactive group model that this works. So yeah, unfortunately, we have to go a little bit more philosophical to come back to the
Mm-hmm.
practical. So when we look at psychoanalysis, we are looking at how society affects the individual, because you have the societal norms that you can and can't do that then informs the superego, which then suppresses the id, creates the ego, etc. And so the psychoanalytic perspective is a relational or political or social um, understanding of psychology. And this gets pulled into Yalom's psychoanalytic groups on which the interactive group is founded. And so when we look at it that way, our groups being a microcosm for the macrocosm, what happens in the small society within the group happens in the big society.
Mm.
Now, Ubuntu is by its very nature as well a political or social ethic as well. And so that is another thing that brings the two of these models together. And so in Ubuntu, there is, I almost want to say, underlying value that Thaddeus Metz kind of brings to the table, and he talks about harmony. And so that harmony, we can understand it as having two constitutive parts. So solidarity, which is kind of the emotional sympathy, the helpful spirit. So the more working together aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have, as I said, social identity or group identity, which is about the interaction of the group. It's about the participation and the trust. And so, if we are going to work with Ubuntu within our groups, we are trying to facilitate emotional sympathy. We're trying to facilitate helpful spirit, um, group identities, interaction, participation, trust. Now, those words should ring a bell to anyone who does the interactive group model, because
Yeah.
we're talking about things like cohesion, we're talking about altruism, we're talking about universality, the corrective
Emotional response.
recapitulation. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
well, recapitulation of the primary family.
Yeah.
We're talking about interpersonal learning. We're talking about development of social techniques, all of which are Yalom's curative factors. And so, by just facilitating um, the interactive group model in that way, in facilitating the curative factors, we are almost, in a certain sense, already working on Ubuntu without necessarily calling it that.
Mm.
And so we're pulling the group together. We're giving the group an identity. We are building cohesion. We are working on group norms. We are working on group interactions by direct communication.
Mm.
Um, we're working on social participation, which is our OPAs. And so all of these things kind of go hand in hand. And that's why, in my opinion, Ubuntu fits so nicely within the psychoanalytic framework of Yalom, which then again fits in really nicely with our interactive group model for occupational therapy.
Mm. It's quite interesting. I read Yalom's autobiography, his memoir. Um, What Becoming Myself, I think it's called. And he actually doesn't see it as being psychoanalytical. He kind of tries to move away from it. But I understand what you're saying is that it's again that the social norms that we actually grow up with have such an incredible impact on developing us as individuals and what we think we're allowed to say and do, and how that either hampers or enhances our interaction and interpersonal relationships with people. So, but I think what I'm hearing is that they are so beautifully overlapped that by merely facilitating our curative factors of Yalom, we are almost automatically also facilitating the Ubuntu process. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
And vice versa. So if you came from a more Ubuntu background, by facilitating Ubuntu and its emotional sympathy, its helpful spirit, its participation, its trust, you're already working on Yalom's curative factors, and so it goes both ways.
Mm.
But I think what's so beautiful about this as well is that uh, one is an ethic that is quite flexible in nature. So Ubuntu does not always look the same everywhere. So, for example, one of the examples I used in my masters is that what Nelson Mandela uh, reflected about Ubuntu in his um, kind of interviews was that whenever somebody comes into the community, you automatically give hospitality. They live amongst you until such time that they need to go, and that maintains harmony within the community. Those factors that we were talking about, solidarity and identity and whatever. Whereas in the vendor culture, one needs to sit outside the village until somebody comes to talk to you, find out who you are, where do you come from, who's your family. There's almost this dance that happens. you then go to see the village chief, who you then present a gift to, because it's you showing that you are building community. You're aiding this specific village or this specific community with your gifts. Um, and that in turn, that kind of skepticism, that holding uh, apart until I trust you enough to bring you in, that maintains harmony within the vendor culture. And so, even though we have one that trusts first and might then be skeptical later, we have another one that is skeptical first but trusts later. And both of these still are Ubuntu, both of these are still maintaining harmony, but it's in different ways. And I think this is another thing that's so important when we talk about Ubuntu in groups as well, because the problem with the other ethical theories that we have is it's overarching and it's very rigid. Whereas Ubuntu allows for fluidity, so each group can have its own norms when we talk about norm setting.
Yeah.
And so, even though we have this greater understanding of harmony, where the group as a whole, as long as the group can stay together, any conflict can be resolved, any norm can be readjusted to fit what the group needs. And so this is another thing that makes Ubuntu so perfect for the interactive group model, is that it allows for each group to be totally different when it comes to norms, and to set norms as long as the group doesn't disintegrate, which is that harmony.
Yeah. So I'm also, what I'm hearing you saying is that harmony isn't this idea of we've always got to be at peace with each other and we've got to never have harmony. Doesn't mean that. No, harmony, and that's where I think we're holding this tension, because sometimes it's about the person sitting outside and needing to come in. And as a group dynamic evolves and the group starts uh, growing and developing, sometimes more members are on the outside and then they're drawn in again, and then the collective is held again, and then somebody else moves maybe to the periphery and then they're brought in again. And so there's this complex dance that is constantly being held between when is a specific person's experience of something that happened in the group being reflected on and seen as sometimes just their personal experience, and other times as a voice for something that's happening in the group. And so we are checking in, is this a dynamic of the group that's presenting itself, or is it an individual experience? And that individual experience is informing the group, making the group more aware of what's actually happening in it. So it's actually quite a complex dance. And I think for first times therapists, it must sound, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to do this? So I'm just wondering, just very kind of practical 2 or 3 things that are easy to do that you would suggest they do apart from facilitating curative factors.
So I think it comes back again down to the basics of the interactive group model, which is build cohesion. So cohesion, cohesion, cohesion.
Yeah.
The second thing is facilitating direct communication. So in the previous episode, we spoke about the khutla, and the khutla is, again, you kind of come to the khutla to resolve disputes. It's kind of like a judicial court sometimes. But what happens is you and your neighbor try and resolve your issues without taking away from that person's personhood. And so if someone doesn't have a goat to give in reparation for the goat that you stole, they look at other ways of making reparation. Maybe you'll work for the person, or but it will never be in a way that takes away from your personhood. So to say that communication that is facilitated, that Ubuntu that is maintained, is that direct communication. So we're looking at cohesion, we're looking at direct communication, and resolving things now.
Mm.
Um, the quicker things can be resolved, the quicker the harmony or the group dynamic can be maintained. And
Mm.
so we're resolving issues in the here and now constantly. So I think if we have those three things, I think we're already moving practically towards a Ubuntu philosophy,
Mm.
um, or
Maybe
ethic or
to come
framework.
in there, sorry, to come in there. I think also the other one is about really making space for the group's identity to
Mm.
become real, tangible. That this feeling of I'm part of this collective, and the only way I can do that is by kind of really becoming aware of this collective's identity that I'm part of. So I think that's maybe another one that is a very easy way to go about facilitating the Ubuntu.
Mm. I would say so, yeah. And I think it by facilitating the group identity, you are in a certain sense facilitating this thing that is greater than the
Yeah,
group.
exactly.
So every member becomes the super flyers, but at the same time, the super flyer, which is everyone in the group, will help people soar. There's something about the name chosen that is
Yes.
not ironic. It becomes the identity of the group. There's something about freedom in the super soarers or flying away that then becomes a very poignant thing for that group. And
Yeah.
so to understand that whatever the group chooses as a name is the bigger thing that also, in a certain sense, needs to be facilitated.
Yeah. And that in itself also brings the wisdom that unconsciously there's something that allows this group to choose this name out of the billions of names they could have chosen. It was this one because there's something about that that also shows there's this transcendental nature of the group that of everything they could have chosen, this one is the most significant at this moment in time for this group in terms of the wisdom that they need to kind of tap into or plug into, as I said, that makes it such a beautiful dance again between this is the collective and this is the collective I'm part of, and this is something about that says something about that collective.
Exactly. But I think that might take a bit of more nuance for beginner therapists. But I
Maybe.
think I think if you can stick to the basic three things, the ones about cohesion, because as long as the group maintains its groupness,
Mm,
for lack of better word, the harmony is maintained and the Ubuntu is then
mm.
maintained. The direct communication allows for individuals within the group to
Yeah,
interact and maintain their personhood.
yeah,
And then, thirdly, the here and now, that by sorting things out here and now, we are allowing for the participation, we're allowing for the trust, we're allowing for the helpful spirit, and so on. And so, if you can facilitate those three things, I think that would provide a firm foundation for the start of Ubuntu. And then later on, you can definitely go towards facilitating the group identity as a whole. But I think that takes a bit more experience. If I think about my own journey, I think it might be there might be too many things
all right, so
at play there.
we'll just keep it simple for the new therapist, but maybe for
Yeah.
those that are older at the game or been,
Mm.
had facilitate a bit more. It's about understanding that, asking the group to choose a name or asking them to develop something or a group post or whatever. Just really helps to facilitate those elements and what that actually means. But yes,
And
I hear what you're saying.
group norms. I think that's also important. I think people forget about how important it is for the group to choose its own norms. I think
Yeah.
when you come into a space where there are preset norms, the group can't develop in a certain sense the way that it's supposed to.
Mm.
And so, yes, in the forming stages of group therapy, yes, there is very superficial norms, or there are
Mm.
norms that you might have set, or your institution might have set. But as you move through into your norming stage, it becomes storming and norming phases. You become more aware about the specific need of the group for certain norms,
Mm.
and then that is important to facilitate that rather than staying with the old norms, because then the group again can achieve its personhood. Each individual can achieve their personhood because they're moving towards that social aspect. They're moving towards what the group needs.
Yeah.
So yes, I think the norms are part of the identity, and we mustn't forget that.
Thank you very much, Michael. Maybe that's a very good place to stop for this episode. So just very practical ways how we actually can, and maybe a lot of you are already facilitating Ubuntu, just not aware of it. So maybe in this coming week to just be very aware of, am I doing those things that Michael suggested? So cohesion, cohesion, cohesion. Am I really facilitating direct communication? And lastly, am I working in the here and now and making sure that any conflict that arises is resolved with each person actually keeping their personhood, which I think is a really interesting tweak or provisor in a certain sense with regards to Ubuntu. And then lastly, the other one that Michael mentioned was to make sure that the group selects their own norms. So maybe have a look at those 4 things to do in the coming week. And we will be back with the next episode, so don't miss out. In the meantime, happy facilitation.